Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you with us. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the program. Welcome to the conversation. A couple things for our first-time listeners, of course. Number one, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening. So that way you get the latest and greatest updates of episodes and rants and all the good stuff that we put out. Number two, don't forget to stop by the rexandrewsshow.com website. You know, we tell people stories here on the show, but we don't always have time to get to everything, obviously. So we put up profiles and we have information where you can find information about our guests, past, current, and future, because they have a lot of interesting things going on. That's why they get on our show. So don't forget to do that. And then one last thing, I'm not bashful. I will beg. In fact, I'm a well-dressed beggar today because I'm wearing a collar. So I will beg, if you think we're doing a good job out there on the show, if you give us those 5-star ratings. We're very, very thankful for those. And I've got a new feature that I always am doing to recognize our listeners all across the globe. And it's odd that I haven't mentioned this one because it's a fairly large city. I'd like to welcome back listeners who are in St. Paul, Minnesota. So thank you for tuning in. You know, we've been very blessed since we've launched the show in January of 21. We are listened to in 32 countries across 6 continents in over 520 cities. And if I could figure out how to market to those pesky penguins, and probably more important, charge their cell phones, I'd have listeners in 7 continents. So we've been very blessed. And that's all because of 2 things, you, the listener, and also our great guests. All right. So enough of the housekeeping. Let's get on to the conversation today. Excited about this guest. We've had a lot of, it's been a while to get her scheduled here. She's one busy person. She's doing a lot of interesting things. I think you'll find her story very interesting, the things that she's been through. But, you know, as we start off, we talk about things that are important. So I'll list a few things about our guest today. She's a mom, which, you know, is there a better title for a woman in the world? I don't think so. Only followed close by as wife. And so we'll talk about those influences in her life. She's a fellow podcaster, so it's always great to have a peer on the show. And in addition to that, she has a radio show, so she has a special place in my heart because I'm an old radio guy. She's a blogger. She used to do a lot of writing and blogging and that. I know that's kind of I don't know if people call it passé today, but you know, that's a lot of work to do a blog. She is a speaker, and then she has created an online community called Soul to H2O. And so really interesting stuff that she's doing. And of course, I got a nice stack here. Wonderful gifts that came into the mail just the other day. She's an author. So I'd like to welcome to the show today, coming to you live on this recording. Isn't that a funny thought? Sherry Stahl. Sherry, how are you?
I'm very good and excited to be here, Rex.
Well, thank you. We're glad to have you. So what part of the country or the world are you dialing in from today?
I'm from a little town called Leamington, Ontario in Canada. Okay. We are the southernmost point of Canada on like mainland. There's a little island called Pelee Island just off of us that is a little bit further south, but we are just the south side of Detroit.
Okay, south side of Detroit. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So glad to have you in with us. So it's always, I've got tons of listeners in Canada, and it's always good to have more. So we'll be connected to your community. Okay. So as you know, the show's about biographies. We tell people's stories that success doesn't fall out of the sky. You know, earlier this year out here in Colorado where I live, we had airplane parts fall out of the sky, just 3 blocks from my house. And so, but success doesn't happen like that. This doesn't pop out into us. And so we want to talk about your story and your journey. So when we're going to do that, we like to go back to the beginning. We like to go back and understand all these influences and pivot points and things at different levels. So we want to know where you were born. Now, you don't ever have to write these down because this is the basis of the show, is telling people stories. So where were you born? And then where were you raised? Being raised is different than where you're born, because I had a guest on the show, Ellie Soja, who moved 63 times before she was 15. So quite a bit of influence of moving. We want to know about your family. So, you know, do you have siblings? They survive your harassment? Your family life growing up, you know, your parents, what type of occupations they did, emphasis on education, stuff like that. Then we want to understand what you were interested in. So as a kid in formative years, what did you do outside of school? It could be sports, computers, theater, dance, music, shoplifting. No joke. I actually had a guy on the show who, by the age of 15, Larry Cole was a car thief. Now he's no longer a thief, but he was a car thief when he was a kid. So anyway, so Cheryl, let's go back in time. Let's learn your story a little bit here and some of these influences. We'll hop around your education a little bit, then some of the pivot points in your adult life, and then we'll get up to what you're doing today and all the exciting things that we're going to talk about. So where were you born?
I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. So it's kind of in between where I live right now and Toronto. And it was a medium-sized city, we'll say. But I didn't live there very long, though. I lived there, I think it was before kindergarten. My parents moved for the first time from that. But I actually moved 9 times before I went to college.
Wow.
So I can't beat that Ellie Soja.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, but 9 is a lot. That's a lot of
9
moving
is
around.
a lot. And that shapes you. For me, I'm an extrovert, so I loved it. I honestly did for the most part. I loved moving, getting to meet people. I think that's part of why I'm doing shows and lots of different things that I do. I'm interviewing people. And so I love meeting people. But my sister, that was really difficult for her personality. And she found it really a struggle all the times that we moved. But for me, I don't know, it was like new adventure.
So what caused all the moving?
My parents moved a lot. Like they would buy a house, fix it up, sell it, buy it, fix it up, sell it. So that, and then other times, I remember one time we had moved into a big, huge, beautiful house. They had, just kept climbing up. But then the recession of, I think it was 1989, maybe before that, hit. And they had to sell the house we were living in, and they had owned a couple other properties. And I actually ended up living with my aunt and uncle and cousins. And then something happened there. My cousin got in an accident. Then we had to live with my grandparents for a bit until we found the place that, my parents could settle on, that had a shop. My dad was a mechanic. So we moved a lot. And I grew up in a racing family. I think that's probably the most interesting thing. A lot of people are shocked by that I grew up in such a kind of a guy's world growing up. Yeah, my parents were involved in drag racing. My dad and mom had high performance car parts stores.
Oh, wow.
My dad, they built engines for race cars. They sold car parts, sold cars. We were always changing cars. As soon as you liked a car, my dad would sell it, I think. He loved buying things and selling things. My sister and I used to joke that if anyone offered for us, we'd be gone.
Wow.
The price was right.
So did you guys come down to the United States and race at all?
Oh, yeah. Every year, my parents would go to Indianapolis. They were involved in the NHRA, National Hot Rod Association. So growing up, they raced. A lot of times my dad owned a team of race cars and had different drivers. My Uncle Danny was one of the big drivers. He was really quite amazing. And so they traveled for that, but a lot in Canada, mostly in Canada, but they did travel into the US for some races. And then my parents bought racetracks when I was a teenager. It just became a teenager, like 15.
Wow.
And so then we went from going to the racetrack on the weekends to owning it, running it, working it. I literally child labor. Like if people knew how much we worked, it would not be okay by the law, but that's what you do when you have a family business and everyone pulls together. And my Fletcher family, that's the way everyone was. And long weekends at the racetrack, we'd have, I don't know, our house was full. It would either be full of relatives that came to help or else my youth group friends from church. There would be like a room of guys, a room of girls, because they just needed so many extra people working on those long weekends. So great fun as a teenager. It really was, because up until that point, I didn't really see my dad a lot. He would be gone early in the morning, come back most times before we went or after we went to bed. So we didn't get to see him a lot unless mom would go to work and do the book work. We would sit with her at work and play cash register or draw things. So yeah, that was kind of my childhood, was being at the racetrack, and I loved it.
The reason I ask if you came to the States is just because I have friends who are involved at the Bandimere Speedway here in Denver, the Mile High Nationals and stuff. And it's a very unique place because it's right there against the mountain and stuff. So
yes. Yeah. Gorgeous. I never got there.
You never got there. Okay. Fantastic.
I've been to racetracks in California, Michigan, and lots of places, but mostly at the ones. So my parents owned a very famous one in Canada, Cuga Dragway Park.
Okay.
And it's now been renamed Toronto Motorsports Park and London Motorsports Park. So it was lots of fun. For years they were doing that. My parents were actually inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame, the Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Incredible night for our whole family because, you know, mom and dad being inducted. My mom is one of very few women that have been inducted to the Motorsports Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And and it was amazing because Mario Andretti was also inducted into the Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame the same night. So we got to meet Mario, hang out there. They did a little bit of an auction after to raise some money for the organization. And he took off his checkered flag socks and they auctioned them off. And my dad loves an auction. So we own Mario Andretti's dirty socks, and I got them put in a shadow box for mom and dad as a memorabilia of the evening and a whole bunch of things. So there's lots of fun because we all shared in it.
Okay. So did you keep the racing bug with you? I mean, I'm assuming you had to have gotten behind the wheel a time or two just because, you know, you're in that environment.
Yeah, unfortunately not enough. Because I don't know, maybe if I was the male child, I would have been able to.
Yeah.
But that wasn't so much encouraged. Working was really encouraged, but I love racing. I love cars. I drive a red Mustang convertible. So
nice.
Yes, I have the bug, and I have raced my Mustang. So definitely love cars.
Love cars. Okay, it's fantastic. So tell me a little bit. I kind of throw out there this concept of 3 different buckets for parents. The first one is the super encouraging, super supportive parents, fully engaged. So that's the supportive parents. Then the middle bucket's sort of the oh my goodness, things are so busy. Kids, you know, parents love their kids, but they just were so busy eking out a life for them, or were overwhelmed by running a life that they just weren't as quite there. So it's kind of a middle of the road. And then there's a struggle bucket, which, you know, kids have rough environments growing up. So it doesn't sound like your case, you know, where there might be addiction or abuse or severe poverty, tons of moving. Now, you moved a lot, but it wasn't for, you know, the types of stressful situations. So how would you kind of frame if any of those 3 buckets or in-betweens, or just so you could give us a little bit of flavor of what your family life was?
I would say it's the middle bucket.
Okay.
At times there were the lower bucket situations, but my parents definitely, you know, did their best and, you know, loved us, but you know, they were very busy with their businesses. And we actually, my sister and I joke, we had to answer our phone at home. Hello, Cuga Dragway Park. So even at home, the phones would be forwarded to the house. And so you learned to work.
Yep.
That was, you know, an MO. And honestly, there's lots of good about that. But there also is the negative of that for most of my life, I've really struggled to learn how to turn that off and to not work. And my husband would probably say I've not mastered that at all. I was working up late till 11:30, I think, last night, but that's not a regular. That's not all the time anymore. So learning that balance to be able to take rest. I remember when my kids were little, a counselor suggested for me to practice rest And she suggested that I lay on the bed with my kids and we just talk. Mm-hmm. And so it started breaking those patterns of constantly busy, constantly going. It's definitely been a lifelong struggle of that, working. My dad's favorite saying that we heard in the house was, you snooze, you lose. And that's a drag racing saying. But it very much became our family lifestyle of you had to keep going.
Keep going.
Keep moving, which has, there's the flip side. There's the good and the bad of that. I think that I definitely have a very good work ethic. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the other thing that when you look back on your childhood and, you can pick out things that mom and dad didn't do right. My kids will do the same.
Sure.
All of us. But the one thing I didn't always like when I was younger but as an adult, I recognized helped me was that my parents got us to do a lot of different things at work. And I remember one day seeing my dad bought a swather, which it cleans the hay off of the fields and puts it down. So it's massive, like this massive machinery. And I had done almost every position at the racetrack other than the burnout box. And I said, I will not do that. And I will not drive that big tractor, that swather, that's scary. So of course, what did dad make me do that day? I had to drive the swather. I remember I was so scared and I was just a little thing. I'm like 5'3.5", 5'3 3/4". So, in this massive machinery. And then I finally got it. And I was like, this is fun. I was having just the greatest time cutting down these hay bales and doing that. And then, of course, once he knew I could do it and I wasn't afraid of it, then, I went back to the office. But those experiences left me with this belief in myself that I could do things. Even if I don't know how to do it, I'll figure it out. So I think, when you were listing the things that I'm doing currently, and if we listed all the things I've done up until this point, there's a lot of different things because I just kind of grew up thinking, well, you'll figure it out. So I love trying new things and new adventures because life's exciting that way.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship with your sister. Did you have a good relationship with her?
Growing up, we fought a lot. Okay. Yeah. But yet we were close still. But I was definitely that big sister trying to mother hen her. But, if you could go back and change some of the things that you said as a kid, I think there was times I know there was times that I was a rotten big sister. But now my sister and I are so close. She is just like my dearest friend and we talk all the time. Our relationship has changed over the years where we value every moment we get to be together because we don't live near each other.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, so a couple more things on the background. What were your interests outside of working? I know you worked a lot.
I worked a lot, but I love baseball.
Okay.
I played baseball up until a few years ago when my shoulder really was like done playing baseball. I was an outfielder and a lot. So anyways, I probably could go back. My shoulder's much better with different exercise I've done now, but I don't know. After a few years, you're thinking, do I go back to that? So love playing baseball. I love sports. In school, I played soccer, baseball, any kind of sport, basketball, volleyball team. I was on every team that I could. Not that I was great at all of them or anything, but very athletic. I ran track and field, actually excelled at that, and made it to what in Canada is called, in our province, called OFSA, the Ontario Finals in high school, until I blew out my knee. And
okay.
So I took a bit of time off from sports, but I still love like that team sport experience more than I love working out. But big in my life was church. And church was really my escape, my haven. And church camp was like my biggest haven, where when life would get difficult, at church, I knew I was always accepted, always felt so valued, so loved, appreciated. I remember they sang this song in church. I'm a promise, I'm a possibility, I'm a promise with a capital P. I'm a great big bundle of potentiality. And so at home, my parents weren't brought up with a lot of, affirmation. And actually in my dad's family, they made this word up that was called braggadocious. And,
Yep.
it was really like a sin to, to compliment more, or to give someone praise for what they're doing. It just wasn't a way of life. So when I was at church and I felt that affirmation, then it was just, I fed on that. It really was so helpful for me. And, just building my relationship with God was such a great thing for me. And no matter what I went through in life, he was always there no matter what. And it was just a real healing place for me throughout my whole life. Absolutely. And so I was involved in youth group, kids ministries. We had this thing called Crusaders in our churches, which was kind of like Girl Guides. And you had the sash with the badges, and I'm competitive, so I just love that.
Mm-hmm.
You could win so many awards, and I loved all that side of it. But I think, the absolute acceptance and love there was what really kept me going back. And so, then I was involved in youth. I was a youth leader as a teenager. And that really led to, I guess, the next question you're probably going to ask.
Okay. So no, I'm going to go back on one other thing.
Okay. You go back.
Looking back, setting aside your parents. Okay. Is there a particular person that you can look back on your youth and your formative years and said, this person was either a mentor or was very, very impactful? Was there one person that just really stood above the crowd?
Do I have to share one?
Well, we only have a certain amount of time. Okay.
So I would say throughout my life, my Uncle Bill. Okay. I used to go and spend weekends. His daughter was just a year younger than me. Mm-hmm. He was the reason a lot why I got to go to church, because I would go with them. He would drive me. He drove the church bus. I used to go on the church bus, and then Mom and my sister and I, we would go on the church bus together a lot of times. Mm-hmm. He was always just such an encouragement to me. And he still is to this day. He has prayed over me, encouraged me, believed in me, because I chose a path that was not super uncommon, of girls in ministry or women in ministry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But he absolutely believed in me. I was blessed. My aunt was a pastor. So I had these examples around me, and this belief from my uncle of that calling on my life, whereas maybe not everyone else did believe that it was okay for women to pursue ministry and speaking and kind of being on the pulpit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, fantastic. I always like to ask that question because I don't throw it out there, but it's just something, on the spot. Who was this big impact? All right. So tell us a little bit about your education. After you finished up high school, what was next?
Yeah. So when I finished high school, I went to Bible college. I felt called to go and to study, to get into ministry. And those were amazing times. I loved it. I love researching. It's interesting because when I was in high school, I could not wait to get out of high school. I don't know. I think you just take so many courses that you're not interested in. And so I didn't like it. I actually skipped a whole lot of high school. When my parents bought the racetrack, they allowed you to, you had to have notes to sign out, and they didn't know my parents very much, and they were working. So I used to sign notes and sign myself out. So then I got to college, and I loved studying. It was kind of a shock to me. Mm-hmm. And so I immersed myself in it. It was amazing. And I think in my teenage years, my leadership, experiences started in youth group and then in high school, different things. Mm-hmm. But in college, I'd say that leader that was within started to really come out, and I began leading groups, a missions team here or there. Okay. I was class president and things like that, where I just all of a sudden really started to grow into that leadership role in my life. So loved college, made the best of friends, and really my roommate in Bible college changed my life.
Okay.
She recognized my self-worth was an issue. And she saw my striving to achieve, to people please and all that. And that I needed to work on that. And she used to actually make me pray before I went to bed. And she was my roommate, so she could do this. And she made me pray and ask, God, help me to see me the way you see me. And then she had me quote, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. God, your works are wonderful. I know it full well. I say it off the top of my head because I said it every night. And that changed my life, to see myself the way that God saw me and all the good. And so school was amazing. I love the part where you could debate and research. You didn't have to believe one way. My school was very good in that way, to let you really research, learn, work out what you believe.
Okay. So after college, and you had great experience there, what was your next stop? What was your next pivot?
So in my last year of Bible college, I met a friend's friend. And I guess I had met him before that, but he was dating another girl. Anyways. But I guess it was the summer before my last third year. Mm-hmm. I met a very charming guy who led me to believe he was something he wasn't really. He had talked about going into ministry and that we would be in ministry together. And I fell hook, line, and sinker. And within, less than a year was married. And that pivot changed the trajectory of my life. It absolutely marred a lot of my life. I stayed in a very unhealthy relationship for 20 years.
Wow.
When you look back, you're like, I don't understand how I did. But it was just really a difficult marriage. And right from the honeymoon, right from the very first night, in retrospect, I should have called mom and dad right on that first honeymoon night and asked them to pick me up. But, you're just this good little Christian girl, and you just, I don't know. No one in my family was really two-faced like that, hiding things. Mm-hmm. If anyone was bad, they were just outright bad. They didn't hide it. And so I had never needed to be suspicious before, and just trusted. But, if you had 20/20, you could change a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if I did, I wouldn't have my two kids. And I wouldn't want any other two kids in the world. They are the most incredible. So that absolutely changed my life.
Now, were you working at all through this marriage? Did you take on some careers, or, I understand that period of your life was explosive and a lot of things that came out of that, but as far as, emotional and that kinds of stuff. But what were you working during the day? Were you stay home? I mean, what was it like?
So at first I was a youth pastor, and at first that was okay with him. Sure. And he was fine with that. And it kind of went in waves where he was okay with me in ministry and then he wasn't. And so as much as I felt I had his permission, mm-hmm. I kind of did things as I felt he was okay with it. I let him be that barometer of what I could and couldn't do. And, that's a issue on my side. But yeah, I loved being a youth pastor. I love youth. I actually still just stay in touch with some of those kids that are now old and have, kids nearing high school, no, not university, but some of them kids just going to be entering into high school now. So I love that. Then I got involved in women's ministries when I started to have kids, mm-hmm. and I stayed involved in women's ministries until now, but it was more off and on. A lot, it was in my home church, wherever we lived at the time. I moved 9 times as a child. I've moved 9 times as an adult.
Wow.
So all within Southern Ontario, but all over South and Central Ontario. Yeah, so I have worked, and then I actually ran a company with my ex, and we We had a very successful business in the automotive tier 1 industry. So I was the director of finance and operations of our company. And that until, you know, the ending, well, even after the ending of our marriage, I still was working there. And separating that's very difficult.
Okay, fantastic. So when did you start blogging? I mean, because blogging usually takes place before, you know, all the podcasting and the videography and all that kinds of stuff today. So when did you start blogging?
Yeah, I actually, blogging was not the first, like,
oh, really?
It wasn't the catalyst of what I'm doing now. It actually was my first book, Water in the Desert. So after I went through divorce and such difficulty, my daughter, I got remarried, and that was great. It was this amazing circumstance, and where I really felt my life was turning around. And, you know, Todd and I are happily married, and it's so good. But at the beginning there, all of a sudden, my daughter's father came back in the picture for her, and really tried encouraging her to move away and move back with him, which would have moved her back to where her friends were, had, you know, where we'd been living. And she had been dealing with depression for years. That was a lot of the catalyst of me leaving. But she had been struggling for a long time, and then started to get better, and for about a year and a bit. But then when this all happened, it just knocked her off her feet, and she went into the worst depression that she ever did. Would be in her bedroom for weeks at a time if I didn't bring food down to her, or, you know, sometimes she would come up maybe for supper. She would be down there and laying in her bed crying. It was just awful. And it was during this time that I had started writing out on some cue cards ideas for writing a devotional. And as I wrote that, I just kind of stuck them aside, and that was on a weekend. And it was during this week my daughter took off, didn't know if she was going to be coming back. I was brokenhearted, and I was laying on the couch just in fear for my daughter's life. And I really had this kind of come to Jesus experience where I said, God, I cannot fix this child. I'm taking her to doctors. I'm trying medication, everything I'm trying, counselors, nothing is working, and she's getting worse. I don't know now what's going to happen. And so I just trust her with you. And I felt like God encouraged me to get up off that couch and start doing what he called me to do, which I knew was to write. And it was something that I felt years and years before, that I was called to write, and that I would write books, but something I didn't know that I could do. I really struggled with believing that I had something to write, that I could write. And so it was actually, I got off the couch, went to my computer, and I grabbed those cue cards, started writing out that, and it was just, it flowed from there. I wrote that book in less than 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah. The first part, the devotions, they were written literally, I think, within a couple weeks.
Right.
But then I added the whole study guide portion at the back. And that was a lot of research and trying to come up with creative ways to help get the messages out. So my husband, Todd, is an artist, and he helped me. He did artwork throughout the book and illustrations that really hit home the messages. So it was that book. And as soon as I published that book, and after I went through divorce, and even at the end of my marriage, I had stopped speaking. I'd stopped, ministering in women's groups and everything. So it had been a few years since maybe 4 years since I had been involved in speaking. And all of a sudden, people started asking me to come and speak. And I remember I was shocked, because I kind of thought that dream for my future had died.
Right.
That it was over, and that it wouldn't happen again, because it hadn't happened for so long.
Right.
But it was through the book, that first book, that I actually started speaking and traveling. And then the publisher suggested that I write a blog.
Okay.
That's where the blog came in.
That's where it came in.
Yeah, I did not want to start a blog. I was just thought, I knew it's a lot of work. It still is to this day. I'm still doing it.
You still are.
But I just started sending out devotions, and we called them Soul H2O devotions. So like soul water.
Yeah.
And then eventually after a few years, couple years, another publisher contacted me and they republished my first book alongside my husband's book and published some of those devotions, reworded them into another book called Soul H2O.
Okay. So let me ask you a quick question. Did you write when you were a kid, or was this just sort of an adult onset of these desires and skills? Because, you know, being an author isn't for everybody.
No, or it shouldn't be. No. Yeah. Some books you read, you're like, Yeah. And a great author always has an even better editor.
Right.
You always need an editor. But when I was a kid, I did love writing. And it's interesting how the things that you are called to for your adult life, you know, what you were created to do, you often see in your children and what they are when they're little. And I kept this little box of memory things. And it's interesting that one of the things I kept was my creative writing booklet from, you know, elementary school. And then in college, I loved writing papers. And this is the geeky side of me, but when I finished college, I missed writing papers so much that I would actually just pick a topic, something that I wanted to write on, something I had questions about in the Bible or life or whatever. And I would just research and write a paper. So yeah, that kind of weird geeky side is there. I love researching. I love writing and speaking. So yeah, so I see that throughout my life.
Throughout there. Okay. Yeah. So now I understand you've got some new online courses that you put out.
I do. My first online course, it's called Traveling Through the Desert with You.
Okay.
It takes people through my book, Water in the Desert. It's for people for women who are struggling with desert type circumstances, whether you've gone through a divorce, death of a loved one, financial issues, any kind of struggle in your life where you're just feeling weak, weary, worn out. And, you know, lots of women come to it. They're struggling with depression, anxiety too, different life circumstances. And the course is really there to help people in that time. I wish I had it when I was going through divorce.
Sure.
Have something, you know, you can work on it at 2 a.m. in your PJs because it's online. Yeah. There's over 5 hours, almost 6 hours of video content. There's also podcasts, audio recording, teachings. So there's something there that can help people, whether it's the written, going through the book and really going through the study guide pages. We also have group coaching. So I've just launched my course, as I was telling you.
Yeah.
We had our first group coaching call, and tonight is our second group coaching call. And I love it because I just love coming alongside people that are going through difficult times and helping them to travel that desert road because it's difficult and you feel alone. And I just wish I would have had something like this when I was going through it.
Fantastic. So now tell me about the podcast and your radio.
Yeah. So that is called Soul H2O. A lot of what I do.
Gosh, I wonder where this theme's coming from.
Yeah, where is this thing? Yeah. So so we have the blog, Soul H2O, the devotional book, Soul H2O. The radio show then came next. And that's on Joy Radio in Toronto. So it's the largest Christian radio station that reaches out in the greater Toronto area. And people can get it anywhere. We have people listening in from the Philippines, from Africa, from South America. It's just incredible when you hear these stats. And, you know, this girl wrote me, Holly, from the Philippines, and she reads the blogs. But then when I would post in the blog about the radio show, now she's a regular listener on the radio show. We have an online ministry called Soul H2O Splash, where girls can join in, and we have monthly events. So the radio show is just an amazing, I love it. I get to teach every week and really share practically how the Bible teaches, and not this theoretical book of do's and don'ts, because I don't see God like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I have such a great relationship with him. And so I feel super privileged to be able to share with people. And sometimes I have great guests on and get to interview people. And other times I'm just teaching.
Just teaching. Fantastic. So how does everybody find you? You've got your courses. Is that a different website? Tell us how everybody gets connected with you.
I think the easiest way is to go on my main website, which is sherrystahl.com.
Okay.
And I think you're going to have that in the show notes.
Yes, so we'll have it in the show notes.
A little bit of different spelling. I think you can spell Sherry about 10 different ways, and my last name is different too. But sherrystahl.com. And if you go on there on the menu, you can see Soul H2O. In the drop down from Soul H2O, you can click to either the radio show, because that's a different website, soulh2o.com. But the online course, there's a drop down there for the online course. And I'd love to have any girls join us in the Soul H2O Splash, in the course, or wherever.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Just, taking in your story. What's been the most unique part, or maybe, I don't know, what's an observation that you have of being a woman in a highly male-dominated, I guess, career, profession, being a minister? So what's the big observation?
I was really fortunate to grow up in a church denomination that did allow for women's ministry. I shouldn't say allow. Right. From the very founding of our denomination, women have always been involved. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really understand that other churches thought that way. So I think that was the best thing for me. Having an aunt who was a pastor was like, okay. Why not?
Right.
But there weren't a lot. I will say that. It was having, I think, my youth pastor and youth leaders speak into me that's what they saw into me. And think sometimes when you're young, you don't see what's inside of you. I didn't see the leader inside of me. And if they wouldn't have started calling it out in me, mm-hmm. I wouldn't have pursued it. And they affirmed every step of the way of what I felt that God was calling me to. And it really gave me that permission. And then I think I grew up for Canada, it was a large church of, around 1,500 members. And so, you had the big church and balcony and all that, 2 services on a Sunday. But even as a teenager, my pastor let me preach on a Sunday night service, and I was allowed to do things on the pulpit. I saw women on the pulpit. So I saw that. And I think too, growing up at the racetrack, I was already immersed in a man's world. And then later on working in the automotive industry, I'm very comfortable in that. As much as I'm comfortable in a women's event, I'm comfortable sitting with a group of guys talking about cars. So I don't know. I'm very fortunate though, that the denomination I grew up in wasn't like that. I know that it was not the same. I've worked in Women in Music and Media, a Christian organization for girls that are involved in media. Mm-hmm. And so girls were every denomination, and hearing little horror stories of how they were not allowed to be, who God called them to be. It's just unfathomable to me.
So what makes Soul, this may be a hard question, but what makes Soul H2O different than other content out there that's in the same vein? What makes you different?
I think I don't write lofty. Sometimes I'll read some of my author friends' books and I think, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible writer or something, because I'm not, flowery, because I grew up at the racetrack. I'm a black leather jacket wearing kind of girl. Right. But I think I'm authentic and relatable. And the way that I write most often, it's everyday life. I remember seeing the curtains behind me. Mm-hmm. I read this verse about how him doing something great is like opening the curtains. Mm-hmm. He just opens curtains, and it's like, creating the earth for him was just like opening the curtains. And when I read it, I had literally just opened the curtains, and I'm like, that's the easiest thing you can do. You need almost no arm strength for that, right?
Right.
And And it was just this, and then I read it in God's word, and then I just went and I just started writing about that. And that's a lot of how I write. It's just these practical, everyday circumstances that everyone experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and how the Bible relates to that and how God relates to our everyday. So it's really practical.
Practical. Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, I got one last question for you that I ask all my guests. It's a kind of a left-handed question if people haven't heard it before. There's a concept in this world called the bucket list, especially in the Western cultures, things we want to do before our time is up. But of course, there's always a opposite of everything out there. In fact, I've actually interviewed thebucketlistguy.com. He's funny, Trav Bell, episode 60. He's a great listen to. Anyway, back to there's an opposite of a bucket list. Okay, things we don't want to do, have no interest in doing. That list rhymes with bucket and starts with an F, but this is a family show, so we won't say that. Okay. Yeah. So what might be an item or two that would be on your F-it list? Okay, so I'll give you a couple examples while you think, because it's a kind of a strange question. I won't ever have a collection of pet snakes. That's just not going to happen. I'm not eating any more caviar or sardines or monkey brains. Those three things are off my list. They're not going to do. And I won't ever again do a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. It was way too much humidity, way too much heat, way too much drumming, and way too much chanting, and a slice of nudity. So I'm not going to do that one again. So what might be an item or two that's on Sherry's F-it list?
Okay, I would say immediately what came to my mind is I would never want to parasail. I would just, that would be so scary to me. I like adventure, but parachuting, anything really high up, not on my bucket list.
Not on your bucket list.
Getting it off my list.
That's on the other list then.
That's on the other list.
Okay, anything else?
I literally can't think of anything else. I love adventure. So I don't know if that's the issue. As soon as you're saying bucket list, I'm thinking, I can tell you I want to do this and I want to do that.
No. That's easy. The things we dream about, it's like, yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, I'll tell you what, next time somebody says bucket list to you, you're probably going to remember this conversation, because not a whole lot of people will ask you about what are you not interested in. Well, thanks for coming on. You've been very transparent. I want to make sure people get out to your connections so they can find you on the radio. Give that again.
Yeah. Soul H2O Radio.
Soul H2O Radio.
Yeah, and on podcast. They just
podcast.
Soul, you have to leave a space, H2O.
Okay. And then also at your website, which is sherrystahl.com. And that's starting with an S on Sherry. And like you said. So thank you for coming out. It's been good to have you on the show. And thank you for being transparent. We don't just hop to where we are today. And you're doing a lot of good things. And that's wonderful. So I'm all about people doing great things. All right. So thank you for coming on. Okay, folks, until next time, we'll call this an episode. We recommend that you continue to come out to the website for the show, rexandrewshow.com, so you can get information about Sherry and all of our guests. We're always excited to promote one of our new sponsors, My Next Evolution. So if you're looking for courses, teachers, coaches, speakers, interesting people, mynextevolution.com. And then lastly, just want to point out that we recently have become members of the Daydreamer network. So we're a network of podcasts out there. So doing good things. So until next time, I'll say the three things that I say every time. Be safe, but be bold and make it a great day.